Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today I'm going to be doing a bit of a rant. There are those out there who think Nintendo has lost their touch, that they're not as good as they used to be, that they're not doing well, and that they're headed in a bad direction. And in my opinion, this perspective is what's actually out of touch. The reality of the situation is that Nintendo is doing extremely well. The Switch 2 is a great console with a great lineup of games for just its first 6 months on the market. And so today I'm going to be diving further into this rant and explaining why Nintendo has not lost its touch and actually, quite obviously, is doing really well, some of the best work they've done in a long time. Now, before going forward, let me simply point out that I do have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers. So if you enjoy my content, you know what to do. I would very much appreciate your support. So let's address one big point to start things off here. The Switch 2 has only been out for about 6 months, half a year. I think some people look at what Nintendo's done with Switch 2 and are like, that's worse than a whole year of Nintendo things in the past. Well, that would be because it's only been 6 months, and what's interesting is that you can make an argument that in just this 6 months amount of time, Nintendo's put together a lineup and a selection of just overall content that is very comparable to some pretty good years in Nintendo's past. But let's just talk about the Switch 2 itself. The Switch 2, according to Nvidia, who worked with Nintendo to build the Switch 2, is 10 times more powerful than the Switch 1. This is a substantial leap from a tech perspective. This is something that we don't normally come to expect from Nintendo, this much of a sizable leap. And yet we've gone that, and the console has a significantly larger screen, more ergonomic controllers. But on a system-wide level, there is now fully integrated voice chat across the board, something we've been begging Nintendo to do for generations, pretty much throughout the entire 2000s. And they've done this, and also, they've given us GameCube games on the NSO, something else we've been begging for years. So the console is dramatically more powerful, it has a really nice screen, far improved Joy-Cons that do not seem to have any sort of drift issues, that are ergonomic, comfortable to hold. They've made significant improvements in the online department because we now do have consistent integrated voice chat across the board, and it's a vastly more powerful system from the hardware we had beforehand. How is this a bad thing? This is a very good thing. Nintendo is doing things that we wouldn't necessarily expect, and so they're actually showing a lot of signs of growth and improvement here. And something I want you all to consider as we continue into this topic here, I'm not here trying to say that Nintendo is literally having their very best output in terms of hardware and games that they've ever done before. What I am trying to say is that it's ridiculous to think that Nintendo has lost their touch where they're not close to the best they've been. I think you can look at different things from different years where there were things that were better or weaker. And so if you look at just the 6 months of Nintendo and the Switch 2, it's very clear that they've been doing a lot of great things, and it's not really the case that they're doing far worse than before. And so you look at the hardware of the Switch 2, and you can legitimately make an argument that it's one of their best new consoles ever. A lot of things that would appease longtime fans. Now, you might say, well, if they're doing this, this may come at the cost of reaching the larger widespread audience, but according to sales, that's not the case. Last we checked, the Switch 2 is still currently the fastest selling console in video game history. Nintendo, as of their last big financial report, updated their forecast from 15 million to 19 million to hit by the end of their fiscal year, and from what we've seen of early December numbers, there's a chance Nintendo might even surpass that updated forecast with the extra 4 million. And to be clear, had Nintendo just hit the 15 million by March 31st of 2026, that would have already been a very solid start. Not the best start in history, but a very, very good one that's in that conversation. And so at least in the first 6 months, Nintendo Switch 2 is showing great signs of reaching a large audience while still doing a lot of things to appease the core Nintendo fan with their hardware. So from this perspective, it's just so hard for me to think that Nintendo has lost their touch. In some ways, they may be more in touch, like having integrated voice chat with the game chat system. But perhaps what people are getting at isn't so much the hardware, but the lineup of games. And again, let me stress, this has only been 6 months. It hasn't even been a whole year. And yet with just these 6 months, I think we've seen some very spectacular things. Let's talk about Mario Kart World. Yeah, there are people who say, oh, Mario Kart World is not as good as Mario Kart 8, which I don't think is necessarily the case. Mario Kart World is the most ambitious Mario Kart game to date. It is a massive game with a full open world to explore with, yes, things to do, maybe not things you like to do, but there are plenty of things to do in the open world. You have the Grand Prix, you have the time trials, but you also have Knockout Tour, something entirely new to the series that is very much appreciated by the masses and also by just people who like good stuff like myself. Like Knockout Tour is awesome, and they've been continually updating upon Mario Kart World throughout the year, and they're going to continue to update Mario Kart World, improve upon it, and eventually add new content as the generation goes on. People like to compare this game to Mario Kart 8, that is the prior Mario Kart, but I don't think people really actually consider the base package of Mario Kart World versus the base package of Mario Kart 8. They're looking at Mario Kart World in comparison to Mario Kart 8 after it saw several improvements over many years. Lots of DLC, an improved release on Switch with new content, and the Booster Course Pass. It's not a fair comparison. Reminder that the original battle mode of Mario Kart 8 on Wii U was considered to be bare bones and just basically terrible compared to prior battle modes in Mario Kart history. And even if you truly believe that after many years of updates, Mario Kart World isn't going to be comparable if not better than Mario Kart 8, that's fine. Are we really going to sit here and argue that Mario Kart World is such a worse game than Mario Kart 8 by such an extensive amount that we're going to now say that Nintendo has lost their touch? Not every follow-up in a series is going to be a vast improvement over the other. There are going to be ups and downs. Of course, you always try to progress and be more ambitious as budgets increase and technology improves, as they have done with Mario Kart World. And I'll add, they did take a risk by changing around how they handle Grand Prix mode. I just think it's weird to say that Nintendo has lost their touch because they're not a fan of some of the choices made in Mario Kart World and would have preferred Mario Kart 8, which, by the way, is still available to play on your Switch 2 thanks to backwards compatibility, which was not something guaranteed, yet Nintendo made sure that most Switch titles are available on Switch 2. And let me add, all of your digital purchases transfer over from Switch 1 to Switch 2. It's tied to your Nintendo account. This is something Nintendo would not have done in the past, but they are doing now. An improvement. Quite the opposite of losing your touch. But let's move past the fact that Mario Kart World is an open world Mario Kart game, the most ambitious game in the series yet. Let's talk about Donkey Kong Bonanza. Nintendo could have done another 3D Mario, which would have been amazing, and I absolutely expect that they are working on 3D Mario, and I do not think it's that far off, but that's not the point of this discussion. Instead, what they had the Odyssey team work on, or at least part of the Odyssey team, is a new Donkey Kong game. We've gotten the first 3D Donkey Kong game since Donkey Kong 64 that came out in the 90s for the Nintendo 64. The second 3D Donkey Kong game has finally come out after multiple decades here. And spoiler alert, it's the best 3D Donkey Kong game yet. It was up for so many Game of the Year nominations. It's essentially universally heralded, it's highly praised. It is an incredible game. I very much enjoyed Donkey Kong Bonanza, and this game is not just a good game, it's an innovative game. What Nintendo has done with Donkey Kong Bonanza is an entire game that has so much freedom built around voxels. The level of destruction that you can do in Donkey Kong Bonanza far surpasses any game of high fidelity. Yeah, there are some games that have similar levels of destruction, but not to this level of polish, not to this level of fidelity, and that's because of Nintendo's advancements in how you can work with voxels, 3D pixels. So Donkey Kong Bonanza is an innovative, groundbreaking game, pun intended there. Nintendo's made advancements here that will change how games can be looked at and played forevermore with Bonanza, and it's just a flat out really good game. So when you look at that, to say that Nintendo has lost their touch, it's just unfathomable to me. And I'm not here trying to say that Donkey Kong Bonanza is my favorite game of the year. It's not, actually. It's a very good game. It's one of the best games this year, but I don't think it's the best game of the year for me personally. I think maybe most people might look at Donkey Kong Bonanza as the best game from Nintendo this year. I think that's totally fine. I'm simply trying to say here that I don't even look at Donkey Kong as the best game for me personally this year, yet I can still look at it and understand that it's a very, very good game that's bringing back an iconic series that is highly innovative, and Nintendo took a risk here with Donkey Kong. They could have done Mario, but they had Donkey Kong come out as that second big title for Switch 2. That doesn't say lost touch to me, that says taking risks, advancing, and improving. Very different things. But let's talk about my favorite game this year. That's Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. And I'm not gonna sit here and say that Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is objectively the best game this year. It is personally my favorite game of the year because of how big of a Metroid fan I am. Now, I'm also a huge Donkey Kong fan, I'm also a huge Mario Kart fan, and I'm also a huge Pokemon fan. Yet Metroid Prime 4 is my personal favorite game this year. There are things done right with this game, however, it is a divisive game. We've recently learned from a Famitsu interview even more about the development struggles of Metroid Prime 4, but what we have learned is that Nintendo and Retro Studios built up over the years. They created an infrastructure to make an incredible game, and there's a lot of things about Metroid Prime 4 that are incredible from a graphics perspective, from a sound design perspective. And these are things we can look at objectively. There are things here that are extremely impressive. Nintendo's put out one of their most technically and visually impressive games ever. And so they put out something like that in conjunction with the most ambitious Mario Kart ever and a highly innovative game in Donkey Kong Bonanza, all within a 6-month period. And by the way, throughout this entire lengthy, arduous process of developing Metroid Prime 4, Retro Studios has been built up. They've established a strong infrastructure now, and what's become very clear from the interview and just looking at the overall situation, Retro Studios is now going to have the opportunity to focus on their own vision for Metroid Prime 5. What we saw with Metroid Prime 4 had a lot to do with the initial prototype that needed to be restarted when Retro Studios was brought into the fold. So while there may be people who are not happy with Metroid Prime 4, there are two things that are clear. One, Nintendo's put out one of the most technically impressive games ever, and two, they have built up Retro Studios so they can continue to work and make better games moving forward. These are great signs for the future, not really evidence that Nintendo has lost their touch. And I'll also say, while Metroid Prime 4 has its issues, it's still a good game. I would say it's in line with Metroid Prime 3, which many people have not played, but was also a fun game back on the Nintendo Wii. But maybe you're just so mad at some of the decisions with Metroid Prime 4 and all the issues that came from its development struggles that alone makes you feel that Nintendo has lost their touch. I don't think that's fair because sure, maybe you can have a miss. You're gonna have misses. Not every game is going to be a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. That's just not how it works. It never has been. There's never been a year where Nintendo has put out games and every single game is as good as we could have dreamed. Some games, yes. Some games, no. That's just the way it works. Again, I'm not trying to argue that the Switch 2 in these 6 months is the best 6 months in Nintendo history. What I'm trying to argue is that it's very good, and we have no real reason to be concerned that Nintendo is losing their ability to put out good games. Let's talk about another situation here that, when you actually put things into perspective, is a strong sign that Nintendo is improving things and getting better, not losing their touch. Pokemon. There were so many arguments I had with people before this was confirmed, but we got a Nintendo Switch 2 edition for Pokemon Legends ZA. So many people felt so strongly that there would not be an enhanced version of this game for Switch 2 because that's just not how Game Freak rolls. Typically, when a new console comes out, Game Freak does not put out a next generation version or a new exclusive version of their game until at least a couple years into the console's life cycle. Yet in the first 6 months of Switch 2, we have gotten a mainline Pokemon game that has been enhanced for the console. That's never happened before. Getting Pokemon involved in such a big way for a new console, that is significant improvements, not losing touch. And so I just think some people are not putting these things into perspective. I'm not here trying to argue that Pokemon is the best game ever. It's not. But you know what? It's also not the worst game ever. It's a solid Pokemon game. Metroid Prime 4, probably not the best Metroid ever. But is it the worst? No. It's fun, and there's a lot of reason to think that they're going to continue to improve things. Donkey Kong Bonanza, highly innovative, an incredible release where Nintendo took some risks. Mario Kart World, a very ambitious game that is fun and improving. And on top of all that, since we've just talked about some of the Switch 2 editions with Metroid Prime 4 and Legends ZA, there are other Switch 2 editions. We're seeing a lot of enhancements for different games, some that are paid, but then there are also a lot of free updates as well. These are other things that Nintendo has never done before, but they're doing now. And I haven't mentioned other releases like Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, Kirby Air Riders. These are other good fun games that have been thrown into the lineup in these first 6 months. We've also finally gotten Mario Galaxy 2, something we've been begging to see come to modern platforms for years. It's not a big deal release in the sense of something new and ambitious, but it is something fans have been asking for a very long time, and we've gotten it. And I've made this point several times before, but we are seeing the best third-party support for a Nintendo platform in generations. We are seeing ambitious AAA titles look and run well on the console, and more are getting announced, and developers are figuring out how to take advantage of this hardware fairly quick. We're seeing substantial improvements. You look at games like Chronos The New Dawn, Star Wars Outlaws, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Cyberpunk, impressive outings. We know next year we're getting Resident Evil 7 9 Requiem at 60 frames per second, day and date with the other versions, same thing with Pragmata. Nintendo also announced earlier this year that they are working with From Software, one of the best developers in the world, bringing an exclusive From Software title in the Dustbloods, coming out next year for Switch 2. So the level of third-party support is the best it's been in generations. And so when you think about that, you think about some of the things Nintendo is doing that have never happened before, you think about the quality amount of games that have come out in a short span of time, the improvements with the hardware, and the promise of the future, I just find it so hard to believe that someone could look at this from a level-headed perspective and say that this is Nintendo having lost their touch. I think that perspective is out of touch. Again, I'm not trying to say these 6 months have been the best 6 months in Nintendo history, but what I am saying is that it's pretty good, and there's no real reason to think that Nintendo is losing their touch. There's plenty of reason to think that Nintendo is taking risks and finding ways to improve and continuing on with a promising future. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.